Welcome to the Vertical Go-to-Market Podcast, where you'll discover new opportunities to grow your business from 7 figures to 8 from the world's most successful agency and B2B SaaS executives. I'm your host, Corey Quinn. Let's jump into the show. Today, I'm joined by Seth Price. He's the founder of the law firm marketing agency BluShark Digital. He's also the managing partner with Price Benowitz LLP, a personal injury law firm. Welcome, Seth.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Corey.
I am super excited for our conversation. Just for a little bit of context for our listeners, again, mostly agency owners, aspiring agency owners. What could you share about your marketing agency, BluShark Digital?
Sure. Well, look, I was somebody who had started as a lawyer, for better or for worse, and grew my law firm with digital marketing. I loved it. I love digital marketing, as many of your listeners probably do. So I wasn't somebody who had to niche down. I was in a niche and ended up taking my in-house team from my law firm that had helped build my firm from a modest 2 guys in a basement to what's now a substantial 8-figure firm with 40 plus lawyers. Along that journey, I took my in-house digital team and turned that into what is now BluShark Digital, which now represents several hundred law firms and now plastic surgeons around the country.
And that's fantastic. Yeah, I think you're unique in the market in that you are an attorney. As you mentioned, you were an attorney, you started off as an attorney, you found success in marketing a 2-person firm, and then eventually ended up as an agency itself. What impact have you found that your background as an attorney has had in your ability to grow your agency?
I think it's a twofold. It's a blessing and a curse at the same time. When I started, it was great, and it still is, in that there are a certain percentage of the market that are like, wow, you get me, you understand the ethics laws, you get what it takes to move the needle, and that's how I started, right? I did it for myself, let me help me do it for you. There's a percentage of the market, which is good for your listeners who may not be a lawyer, which is they don't want a lawyer. They want somebody who is a digital marketer. And what's this schmuck? He's a lawyer like me. What does he know about digital marketing? And so over time, we're now at the point with a firm with a business development team and, account rep. It used to be I knew every client personally my first, weeks, years practice. We're at the point where we service a lot of people that I don't know particularly well at all. Many of whom I've never met, which was not how we started. And so I think that you dance with what you got, I know your background a little bit. Like if you are, the largest seller of Google AdWords, and that's that you have superpowers in how you place their money, God bless, you dance with that. For me, I was like, hey, all the other guys aren't lawyers. I'm a lawyer. So I went with that. And then as you grew, I found that it was really useful to be, hey, you get the best of both, right? You want to be where you have a firm that started by a lawyer, which is great, but nobody really cares about that. What can you do for them? And that's where the team and the talent, and I think this is what's true for any of your listeners, is building that great team around you that can execute at scale. Because I would argue, in fact, a guy I mentioned, one person pre-interview, but a guy named Height right now is trying an experiment where he wants to go out and start an agency from scratch in a city by himself to see what would happen.
I know JC. Yeah, I'm familiar with JC.
And so what I love about that story is great, but like what it is those first few clients, you could do through sweat equity, you can will your way to some clients and some success, God bless. But to really scale an agency, it takes a lot of things, right? At some point, it's more than you can service, so you need account reps. There's going to be work that needs to be done, and you're going to have to decide, can I find, like I never white labeled, but people who do white label, can I get the quality that I need? Can I move the needle? Or is it that's my baseline, I'm going to do additional work beyond that? And as you build and grow, you're adding those different pieces. And I think the skill set goes from, are you a great SEO to are you a great operator? And this is true for whether it's a law firm or digital agency or whatever. That it's the amalgamation of those people. When you were at Scorpion, you had 1,000 employees or some nonsense. The great news.
Eventually, eventually, I started. But when I started, it was 100. But you grew to 1,000.
1,000, which is great. But that means you have 1,000th worst employee. if you wind up your employees. So like
Yeah.
that's a daunting thought to wake up to every morning, that you have like that 997, 998, 999, and 1,000. They may not. And so the question is, how can you create systems and a team that operates in a way that allows you to deliver high quality results, despite the fact it's not just you doing the work? And I think that's where a lot of people, my guess is, who are starting out, the nice thing about a niche is that it's focused and you can bring expertise to that and talk that way. And I think that is, to me, I think that is the greatest advantage. And I've seen with a lot of different affinity groups in this area, the idea that if you find something and dance with where less people are dancing, you have a pretty good chance of getting some nice results.
Absolutely. And speaking to sort of the ability to scale and to get to 1,000 employees, which, you mentioned a blessing or a curse, that may not be what an agency owner wants to create for themselves.
And frankly, at 1,000 employees, quality control is tough. It's like, to me,
as is HR,
everything, right? And so, exactly. I pinch myself where we are, and I feel blessed. It's not that we haven't had a quality control issue here or there, and there's been a client or two lost because of it. That's going to happen. But on the law side, I live in these two different worlds. Some of my mentors on the law firm side that have built some amazing organizations. One in New York, if you're a New Yorker, you'd know, is Jacoby and Myers. It's a big juggernaut on TV, and my buddy Andrew Finkelstein's done an amazing job. But he's like, look, if you don't get comfortable with mediocrity, meaning it's not going to be done as well as you could have a very great small agency that represents 10 people, and you do it with maybe an assistant or two. But if you really want to get to the point, you have to know that it's not going to, every inch is not going to be done the way you want it done. And it doesn't stop me from pounding it and pushing it and hoping that I can push people in early days, pushing people till they broke and left. I'm not proud of it, but the idea is you want to hold your standards, but know that, yes, there's some people that are coming that know more than you, and that's awesome. But there are also going to be a lot of people that come along the way that are not ideal, and that you're going to have to figure out how to get them ideal or sort of supplement pieces so that you are making sure that you take care of those all important clients.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about taking a niche approach is that you remove some of the variability in your agency. For example, if you were serving restaurants, dentists, attorneys, CPAs and pool cleaners, all these different types of businesses, you have all this variability in your business. To be able to provide outstanding results becomes much more difficult.
Well, and I think some of it is form over substance. Some of the digital marketing is the same no matter what, right? The fundamentals of getting the phone to ring. What I would say is, and I was shocked because we opened a second vertical about 3 years ago now. And it was interesting that there were huge differences, whereas a lawyer, you would more likely lose a client if the phone wasn't ringing enough. That was, that quickly enough. As you know, as compared to PPC with SEO, that's one of the big risk factors, that you have to get yourself to critical mass for it to work. If it was easy and you just pay 1 month of SEO and you're off to the races, everybody would do it. But it's not like that. You have to figure out how to get the algorithm to like you enough, better than everybody else, into the organic, into the 3-pack, versus when we saw, let's say, in the aesthetics area, the plastic surgery, elective medicine area, there, not that they don't want to make money, but they are so focused on the look and feel of a site. Whereas the lawyer, it needs to be right. They don't want to see typos. But, whereas if a photo is not cropped right on a plastic surgeon site, that is like, and we were sort of, you put resources in different buckets based on what motivates a client. So for a law firm, we know that if we don't get the phones ringing, we're out. And not that like a plastic surgeon stay with you forever if they're not doing it, but that they have so much riding on the aesthetic because that's their, and it's also what they care about. It's what brought them to is taking people and making them more enhanced. With lawyers, like, they want to have their little badges showing the top of this and top of that. They want their video and their photos, but they are looking, and it was fascinating. So I'm guessing that as you go, and I've seen in the home services space, as I've talked to people in that space, you have a benchmark, whether it be Angie's List or Home Advisor. People are used to getting the X number of phone calls. And if you're not apples to apples with what they're doing, they're like, I'll just buy more leads. And so you sort of have to figure out what is it that's driving. I'm guessing there's no aesthetic issue. Nobody's reading copy. I get lawyers rewriting copy. My law partner's like that. He would rewrite something he wrote a year ago. And we were just doing a relaunch of a site. Like, this is terrible. I want to rewrite it. I'm like, okay, you rewrite it. I'm launching it. I have probably like 25 websites for my law firm, different niches, different geographies, different everything, right? Old strategies that used to work. And I would have like none of them if I waited for him to write content or approve content. Not that it has to be ethical, but you have to figure out in each area, what is it
it's so true. It's so true. So we went at Scorpion from primarily attorneys into home services. And you're right. I mean, like those two types of businesses had a similar local marketing problem. But what they cared about were very different things. And even like, so we went into dentistry and aesthetics a little bit as well. And the same exact experience that you said is like, we went in thinking, well, you're a local business, you want leads, but that wasn't their primary concern. Their primary concern, exactly, our experience was the same, which is that they cared about how the site looked.
Right. And look, thankfully for you at Scorpion, love or hate Scorpion, they make beautiful sites. So at least you got that going for you. Right. So that was, but it's, when I look at the, when I look back, it is, as my ego would say, hey, if I can figure out legal SEO, you're telling me that this like HVAC guy shouldn't be thankful to have me? Doesn't work like that. And that's why the niche concept, that if you go in and you know that you're the, pediatric dental specialist, that you're going to be able to connect with people and that those guys know, that you have to be able to show touchy-feely, that the parents are going to be warm welcomed, and you're not selling, you're selling to the parents for the kid, whatever it is. If you can get to the point where you speak their language, and that's what I've seen at trade shows, where when I go to a trade show in legal, I come with great with great gravitas, as I look at other niches, and I've never been to an aesthetics conference. I'd be like a fish out of water there. I tried to get on a phone call with our head of sales for that division, thinking that they'd be lucky to speak to me, and these people could care less what I had to say. And it's crazy. I mean, it makes no sense. It's like saying, hey, I'm not going to listen to Tiger Woods about training. He figured out how to get pretty good at a sport. Not that he can like tell you how to shoot baskets, but he knows how to compete, how to deal with pressure, how to train. And so, but at the same time, it is definitely true that you speaking to a market. And I think that it also helps on a psychological basis. I see this at my law firm. I have multiple verticals, but each one is a vertical unto itself. We do
personal
PI,
injury, criminal defense,
family. And it's not like very early on, our lawyers don't dabble. For the most part, our staff doesn't dabble. So it's not that, and this may be less popular to the narrative, over time, I don't think it's impossible to have multiple niches. It's just if you're a master of everything, it's very, very difficult to gain that credibility. And the good news is anybody's a potential client, but I find that most people, whether it be law or marketing, in the B2C space specifically, that those industry, that it's true anywhere, like B2B industry knowledge means a lot, but that the way that you scale it, the fact that you're not your team, when you think about people, right? Let's say you're magical and you could go and do a dentist one day, a lawyer the next day. All of that will work for your first 10 clients. But if you have people doing it, the fact that they're going dental is going to make them much more efficient. They are going to learn the process and the nuances much more quickly, because while you may be bright enough, you meaning you and your listeners who are listening, may be bright enough to be able to pivot, as you set up those systems, the systems don't work when there's tons and tons of variables.
That's right. Could you take us back to the early days of BluShark and when you were just starting to build the agency, because you were working as the attorney at the firm, like how was this a separate business unit? Was it a separate company? Like, how did you manage the sort of the?
Sure. Mine was essentially the in-house team became the agency. So it was first just Price Benowitz, and we added clients in.
Okay.
And then we went from the basement of the law firm to an apartment to an office We're one of those startups that's every 2 to 3 years, whenever the sublet's over, move to a new location. You're speaking to me from a clubhouse in the hippest gentrifying area of DC, Union Market. And until they decide to knock our building down, we have this awesome space.
So as you were building the practice, the marketing practice back then, how would you go out and get more attorney clients?
Well, at first it was people sort of personal Rolodex and people you knew. I, started out there, a ton of conferences in my space, and I would go, and I was pretty cheap, and I didn't love paying the $1,000 to attend the conferences, and I found out if you spoke, you went for free. So I was speaking at these conferences just because I was frugal, and everybody else was selling something. So I was like, hey, if they're selling something, I should sell something. And, to me, there are many different ways. And look, I take Scorpion as a unicorn in the space that figured out how to scale an outbound sales team. Nobody really in the space has outside of Scorpion has scaled that way. And I'll put that to a side for a second. One of the reasons that niching is so powerful is that you can go to places, meet people, and get to know them, not just over one conference. It's not like you can go to one conference and sign up 50 clients, but I look at the conference world like dating. You go on a first date, maybe you get a bite to eat. Great. By the second time you go to a conference, it's a long lost friend. You're like, oh my God, this is the conference analogy, which is like somebody's like, oh, it's so good to see you again. And by the third one, by conference standards, you're now long lost friends that are reuniting.
Family. Yeah, exactly.
And there's an entire world. So there are circuits in different industries that go around to these different events. And that what I've seen in life, for me, I have the benefit that I sort of double dip. I may meet somebody and I'm sort of ADHD, so maybe they're a client, maybe they're going to be a law firm client, or maybe it's just going to be a buddy. And, I've built this sort of like world that I enjoy, because I always say people do what they like. If you hate people, I say hate people is a strong term, but if you're an introvert that you don't want to be at cocktail parties, this model is probably not going to work for you, and you better figure out how to scale outbound sales quickly. Because I was lucky enough that I love talking to people and got to know people. And if you are able to show your mug at multiple conferences, one after another, that shows that you are, that you're not you're not disappearing overnight. There are plenty of people that show up to a legal conference, as I'm sure everything else. So going to one, it's like a single date, not getting you very far. You get to 3 dates, the 3-date rule, if you, back to my single days, there's something there. And that once there's something there, you can do great damage in that, people do business with people they know, like, and trust. And look, there are people, I look at you, I can tell talking to you here, you're one of these guys that if I met you for 10 minutes, we would be business friends. Like we would connect. I could see you doing real damage at a bar back in the day. And that, but that gets you so far and it's just you. And so the question is, as you want to scale beyond you, can you, and there's a whole world that it's kind of funny because the law firms by definition are much more dysfunctional. There are lawyers, there are legacy issues. What I've loved about the agency is it's much more pure, much more buy-in. We have people, it wasn't from day one, but over and let's say it takes about a 4-year cycle before you figure out who you are, what you need, and frankly, have enough gumption to attract the right people. And not that you can't stumble into good people early on, and we did, and those people are now managers in our organization. There's been plenty of early turnover that I wouldn't be where I was if we hadn't gotten those people out of the way and brought in a team that really buys in at this point, with core values, and we're now in EOS and all these different components, you're jamming and it becomes more self-selecting who ends up joining you. And I think you have much more stickiness than when you first start out and you're trying to figure out where you're going. It's much more haphazard.
At what point in the company's history did you hire your first salesperson?
It's a great question. And there's things so we ended up having sales assistants that would come and go, partially because they had to work with me. And then eventually we ended up, I'd say 3 years in, taking somebody out of analytics who I took to a conference with me and she was smitten, and she became our top evangelist. We call her chief strategy officer, but she is essentially our first true person that could go on the road and sign people up that's not me. And that's a whole nother salespeople. There are things I could tell you I've figured out and cracked that nut. I have a sales team of eight or nine people. I still haven't cracked that nut. Hiring sales is not for the faint of heart.
No, nor is managing them. How did content marketing play a role in your growth? I know you have 2 podcasts. I know you've contributed a chapter in a book a couple of years ago. You've obviously been doing a lot of content. Like what type of content did you do early days, and
funny?
How did that help you grow?
The SEO in me thought you were going off with how do we build a content team, which is one of the hardest things to do in SEO. Period. Yeah. But I think that each of these things is a layer, and I enjoy like my SEO podcasts that I'd love to have you on. That is the SEO Insider was just basically a way to network with other industry insiders, bring people on. If I called, if you call me up and say, hey, Seth, let's chit chat, might happen, might not happen. But you say, hey, come on my podcast, and all of a sudden we spend this great time together. So the idea that I could get, people that otherwise were the glitterati of SEO and could come on my podcast, some of those have ended up reciprocating with speaking opportunities, with just emails from time to time with like tips or tricks, with networking, with, it's built a greater network. So again, there are 1,000 things that we need to do, but I would argue that if you are niching, there are 2 things that I love about some version of a podcast. Okay. The first is that it allows you to network with people that otherwise you just wouldn't get that time with. It's like golf. You get 4 hours with somebody. Here you get 30 to 45 minutes. They get to talk about themselves. People like talking about themselves, and that's a really good thing. But the second piece is I think it can be used as a business development Trojan horse, where if you're doing something all on whatever it is, plumbing, roofing, putting people on your podcast as a way, whether it's an existing client, whether it's a prospective client, whether it's somebody in the industry that people know, like, and trust that's being associated with you, that's really valuable. Old school, people used to do breakfast meetings in town. And it was amazing because you would basically have people, give them breakfast paid by a sponsor, and then you would bring, if you were a B2B player, my corporate lawyer friends would bring who they wanted to do business with as the speaker. And then all of a sudden, the speaker got to come, they had an audience, you as the host got time with your speaker. I think that the podcasts have allowed you virtually to do a lot of that. And whether it's upstream, where you get to see somebody who's been inside the belly of the largest outbound sales organization in the world, in our world, or whether it's, the ability to think that the person who you're putting on could either do business with you or be a referral source. Those things are extremely powerful. And I think that if you look at it super maniacally, like that's my only reason for doing it, it will come through. But if you genuinely enjoy people and enjoy talking to them, then it becomes more of a joy, and hopefully the other person feels it the same way, and it becomes a positive touch point. And again, like a conference, you go to one conference, the odds of it going anywhere. What's going to come from this? Is it possible that some person's going to reach out to me and say, hey, I think I got a small thing going. I'd love to roll up into what you're doing. There's so many different permutations out there that every time you put yourself out there, it's just one more opportunity for that additional touch point that'll hopefully pay dividends later.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm already going to ask you after this interview if you will be willing to let me quote you in my upcoming book. So we can talk about that later.
It would be an honor.
Outside of podcasting is very, very powerful. I agree for all the reasons that you said, and I'm a big proponent of the relationship side, right? So building up relationships within an existing industry that maybe you're a newcomer, you can get direct access to some of the people who have a lot of influence rather quickly.
It also doesn't take that long to break into different industries, more than others, but outside of the super developed ones, it is amazing, and that if you continue to show up, damage that can be done.
Exactly. And to your earlier point, many agencies don't think of it as a long game. They think, I'm going to go to a conference. If I get a bunch of leads, maybe I'll go next year. It's that's not necessarily the right mindset. It's really,
Yeah,
if we're committed to this industry,
Correct. And I see it now. I'll give you an example. So even though there are people, one guy within my world who niches only to PI lawyers. We've done multiple B2C lawyers, PI, criminal, and family. And we'd never attended a family law conference until recently. And we went to the first one. It was good. And a friend of mine I wasn't there, but a friend of mine is like the big maca. She's been going for years. She's like the queen of the conference. And she introduced my people around. It was great. But, are we going to close anything for them? Maybe, probably not. If we do, that's out of benefit. But there are times where you have to go in. I saw this, for example, in legal. We were East Coast centric. Most of our clients were East Coast. We were known on the East Coast. And like, it's funny because they talk about rap, East versus West. There is a thing like that in legal. And it wasn't until we put butts on a plane and got ourselves to West Coast conferences that we got West Coast clients and we got a buzz out there and it became a thing. But it's like, if you're willing to get on a plane and go, it's amazing what could happen. But if you're looking at what is I think that ideally you want to be looking at, is it fruitful? Are people there using somebody else that could be using you? Where most of my industries are pretty developed, where it's not like somebody's, not having a web person, that they're coming from somewhere else. And so I think part of it is there a market for it, and being smart about it? Because if there is, then it's just a question of people getting to know you.
Hey, it's Corey. Almost every day, I talk with agency owners who are frustrated with getting their outbound program off the ground. The truth is, too many agencies are too dependent on inbounds and referrals to grow their business. We all know that it's getting harder and harder to generate inbounds and that it's just not a sustainable way to grow your business. I'd like to give you the 6 secrets for driving consistent ROI from your outbound that I learned as Scorpion's Chief Marketing Officer, where we doubled the business from 20 million to 40 million just by adding outbound to an existing inbound only program. It's a free 6-day email course that will transform your outbound from broken to consistently driving new sales opportunities. You could sign up and get the first secret right now by going to getoutboundroi.com. That's getoutboundroi.com. Now, back to the show.
Yeah. Are there any suggestions or ideas that come to mind when it comes to building trust within a vertical market? Let's say you're an outsider and you're trying to really build trust. You want to do whatever you can to short circuit or shorten the time frame to become more of a known factor in that industry, get some sort of build a reputation for yourself. What are some good ways to do that in addition to conferences and podcasts?
Well, okay. So, and I think as you're saying, it's multiple touch points. It could be, for example, social media marketing. It doesn't take a hell of a lot to target an audience with your message. And so, I'll tell you, I formed a niche myself. I am now the moderator of legal conferences and panels. If there's a legal panel if there's a panel at a legal conference, 50-50 chance I'll be invited if it has anything to do with growth or marketing to help lead that panel. Some of them are on digital marketing, which is awesome, and some of them are on nothing to do with anything I make money on, like intake. And as that visibility grew during COVID, the numbers on the podcast and the webinars were insane and off the charts. You put a webinar out there, we did a series on PPP loans and had 2,000 people live in a legal webinar. That's never happened before in the history of the world.
Amazing.
Right, amazing. Went back to 200 after COVID. But all of that said, when the COVID sort of ended, we went back to a conference. I felt like a celebrity for a minute, in the sense that so many people had seen me over and over again. And look, that's an extreme example, but it shows you the power of this. So what are the things you can do? Co-branded webinars with somebody in a related industry, related technology. Let's say somebody's doing, intake technology and you're doing marketing. Doing one where you share it to both your lists. Each of these are basic. They may get 70 to 100 people on them. Are you going to sign a single person from it? No, but you got you have ideally over time, exhibiting at conferences, you have a podcast. Yeah. I'm not presuming that you're going to be so good you're invited to speak. That's like the ultimate, right? But the things you control, right, are you can put out content. You can buy lists and make sure that you're targeting the people that you want to be targeted for. Now, is that alone going to do it? No, but each of those are touch points. So that when you finally go to a conference and you meet somebody, hopefully they have a sense of who you are and that they've seen you. And they have like the name means something. And if it's in the back of their mind, that's incredibly powerful that it's not the first time they've met you. When somebody, I know who you are, that goes a long way. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it's definitely something to aspire to.
I love that. You mentioned Outbound. Have you guys dabbled in Outbound? Has that channel worked at all for you guys?
I would say that I am not the poster child for that. I have tried. We've had limited successes here and there, but I bow to the masters with that. One of our rocks is to improve Outbound. And, it's like, I tell a story, I don't want to tell the whole story here, but a neighbor looked over my fence and said, "Oh, wow, your grass is so beautiful." And mine was like crabgrass because my kids would rip out all the grass. And her father-in-law built this beautiful lawn. And I'm like, literally, lady, you're the living embodiment of the grass is always greener. So I'm very, very blessed that our inbound is extremely strong. Our brand BluShark is awesome. And that we get tons of referrals from clients, from friends, yada, yada. That said, I'm going to have to listen to your podcast to figure out how to crack it.
It took us a long time to figure it out as well, as you can imagine. Let's talk about hiring. So how important is it for you to hire employees for your agency who have a legal background?
Oh, I'd say I don't think anybody does, other than the only people that have any lawyer experience as employees that coming in were our contract writers, because we want them to be able to understand the subject matter. And I believe my personal, and hopefully this will help somebody listening, I do not believe in hiring the writers full time. I have been burnt too many times. I hope this doesn't anger anybody, but the people who sit in a room and write all day, every day, have very often a fuse that pops. And I would like to not, I would love to give them as much work as they want, pay them well. And if they don't want to write anymore, that's great. I don't need a last day lunch and everything else. Yeah. They can go and do whatever they want. But I want that's a piece a lesson that I learned that, well, you need in-house editors over time and you need optimizers, but the actual writing, I am not a fan of handling within the office. All of that said, hiring in general, if that's your question, is one of those things that we could spend an entire podcast on.
I'm sure.
But I think it's figuring out, piece by piece how to, when you start out, you got nothing but you. It's hard for me to remember those days. I started with a co-pilot. I think that's pretty important, that if you really want to scale, that having somebody beyond yourself with you is important. So when I started the agency, I had an in-house team. And part of the reason I started is every 2 years I had a guy. 1 2-year period was a woman. But it was like they'd stay for 2 years and they'd move on to do something else. And I realized it was good because I got cheap labor for the next person, but it became old. In your 30s, that's fine. But when I hit my 40s, I was like, this isn't fun anymore. And I would end up hiring I wanted opportunity. That's where the agency came in. But the sooner that you can get stuff off your plate, once you have any meaningful revenue, that to me, it's that hustle. But, if you're willing if you want to put money back into the company, not worry about your margins for a minute, and allow yourself to get that team will allow you to grow. It's easier advice to give than to take. But I know that if you really want to produce quality work at volume, obviously if you know clients, that's silly. But as clients are coming in, making sure that you are staffed for delivery. And again, there's an entire world that I haven't played in that maybe some of your listeners do, as far as you outsource this, and this. And that's awesome. There are people in law firms that do that. But I think to really scale, my humble opinion is you want to control those pieces and not have it just, replicating somebody. I've never white labeled out because I don't love that experience. I know there are plenty of people that make a lot of money doing it, and that's not to say they shouldn't, but my feeling is to really scale, you need to get beyond that.
Yeah, I share that belief. It makes me think about, sales and marketing. Like to really grow a firm, you need to figure out how to do that in-house so that you own that IP and you own that process and you get better over time.
So give me your, for this, since we just, I not poo-pooed it, but showed my lack. What would be your top 3 pieces of advice you give to people for building that outbound sales team? Because that is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah. So I think a big challenge I see a lot of agencies do is that they outsource the very fundamental thing as it relates to going outbound, which is building the list. So let's just use the context of personal injury attorney. One could go out and hire some third-party cold call company or third-party cold email or cold LinkedIn party who are going to come to you and say, hey, we have a list. We can generate a list on Apollo or on one of these platforms. We'll start just kind of what they call spam your TAM, right? Which is just sending out messages and seeing what comes back. Okay. So the number one thing that we did at Scorpion and that I advise my clients on is actually going out and developing the list in-house. And it doesn't mean you get 100% of all the personal injury attorneys in the US. You focus on sort of the Pareto principle, the 80-20. You focus on the 20% of the personal injury attorneys in the largest markets that align with, let's say, if you're focused on larger law firms, focus on building a list of those businesses.
You get the top 10 TV spends in every market.
Done. There you go. Done. And then you focus on those exclusively through in-house outreach. That's personalized, that's consistent. Another big thing that really worked for us at Scorpion, you're probably familiar, is that we sent a lot of gifts in the mail. As a first touch, this law firm wouldn't know who we were. We'd send them a good box of cookies or a video brochure or one of these things that helped to create more of a warm outreach for the sales team versus a pure cold call from, anyone who's doing a cold email or cold phone call. It's so easy to ignore that. But if you receive an amazing gift, it's much more difficult to ignore the incoming calls. You want to at least talk to them, acknowledge the gift, and then see where it goes.
Or some percentage of people will.
Some percentage, and it's not 100% by any stretch. No.
I'm saying this with love. Yeah. I mean, look, I've played around with it. You're wearing your earpods. There's one agency that's played around with that, and I would do it. It's like anything else. I always say this to people. People are like, it's a whole different business. And again, it's not good or bad.
It's a different mindset. It's a different mindset. Yeah, it's a skill set. One last point on this is that it requires, same thing as you were saying about the conferences and the podcast, it requires a long period of time. You need to keep that person on your list and send them a gift every 90 days until you get them on the phone, right? And along the way, you're building up all this reciprocity and awareness that eventually, if they are a large law firm, they have a budget, they have a need, and that they're going to be in the market at some point over a 3-year period. If you market to them, you're going to get on a phone call with them, right? And that's kind of the mindset, is that we're going to keep investing in this one relationship, this one potential relationship over 3 years. We know we'll get them. It's just a matter of time.
Right. If you get 1 out of 4 of the people on the phone, and then 1 out of 5 of those convert, it's still cost effective. I get it.
It is, yeah.
One of the things that I struggle with, I'm curious how you guys dealt with it at Scorpion or in other places where you've done outbound, is that you speak truth. Anybody listening, there are a lot of people out there saying a lot of things. What you just said, I know works. I've been the recipient of it. I know we got those gifts on a regular basis until somebody put us on a blacklist because I market to my lawyers independently. But my question to you is, I find that the ethos of the outbound salesperson is very different than almost every other employee that I've seen across 2 businesses. And, we all talk about culture and core values. I find that the outbound salesperson very often is a different breed. How did those 2 worlds mix? I'm talking about prospectors / cold callers versus people that went to conferences and did those things. How did you mix that with the 1,000 employees? Because those aren't easy people to mix in.
Yeah. So the sales team is definitely a different culture, different group dynamic than people on my team, the marketing team, or the people on the client services. Same is true across the org. And so they definitely had a separate kind of culture that was very performance driven. They were very well compensated based on their performance. And they also had a lot of what I consider to be very high quality resources that help them to coach them up and to help,
You invested, it wasn't just the feed of the person doing it, but it was the pod with the managers.
The manager, we had sales consultants, coaches. They would, as a benefit, they would go to the conferences because the way that we had our sales team set up is that they were based on practice area, personal injury, as an example, and a certain geography. So let's say West Coast. And so they'd be prospecting into the same law firms over a number of years. They'd also go to the conferences and they'd go get a drink with them, right? And go maybe have a dinner or have an experience with them. And so as a result of that, you start to see results. But I think I'll speak to Scorpion specifically. It's a very performance-driven, sales-driven organization. And so that was not a very foreign kind of energy in the company. It was always
so it was built like that. And it's hard.
It was built like that.
I have this amazing culture and this team that would die for me and fights like crazy, but it's hard to comport that with it. And that's one of the, I think it's, yes.
Yeah. I would say the other thing that, when I arrived at the agency back in 2015, there was 8 sellers. They subsisted 100% on inbounds. They drove really nice cars, and they had, they made a lot of money. It was a good life. The challenge is that we weren't going to be able to hit our revenue goals. The founder, Rustin, he really wanted to grow the company, and so we had to introduce Outbound because you can only, there's a limited supply of attorneys in the U.S. who are looking to change their marketing or their website vendor. And so as a result of that, we had to go outbound. And so we had to introduce this whole new culture. And the way that we did that was we brought in a really amazing sales trainer, but then also Rustin, Jamie Adams, the folks who were sort of the leadership team then and now would actually be in the trenches with the sales team, doing the cold calls, following up on these gifts and really being a part of that process. And that really helped to build the confidence over time.
That's awesome. What did you find? Because you tried a lot of different incentives for the salespeople. You mentioned FindLaw at the beginning, and they historically paid a huge percentage of revenue, particularly first-year revenue, to salespeople. Where did you find the happy medium? I don't think anybody pays more than those guys as far as a percentage. How did you, because this is something that young people starting, like you only get so much money in, you're like, okay, well, if off the top, all this money is going to our sales guy. Obviously we wouldn't have the business without them, but where did you find the sweet spot where you were paying enough that you kept people incentivized, but not so much that you killed your margins?
So being a salesperson, I'd say at Scorpion specifically, is a pretty good deal because you had a lot of support. You would have these marketing team who would send you to conferences. They'd send out these gifts to your leads, and there's a lot of support. That said, the compensation, I'll speak generally, but it was fairly, I consider it to be fairly standard. So out of 100% of their on-target earnings, half of that would be salary, and the other half would be performance-based. And so they were provided with inbounds as well as they had an expectation to go outbound. And so they had to make up.
Did you have a target for outbound versus inbound, or were they just one big lump?
Just one big lump. But the sales team was big enough that no one seller could live on inbounds and still hit their quota.
So looking at somebody who's starting here, somebody who has an agent, they're hiring their first salesperson, what would you set a target? Understanding that you guys had some advantages with brand, good and bad, and with gifts and with conferences.
We were a known brand in the space.
What would somebody have as a target generically, just an order of magnitude?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like the idea of 50% of your comp is in salary and the other 50% is performance based. And what that is based, the performance piece is based on what their reasonable quota is, how many deals they need to close per month, 2 to 3, maybe 4 to start out. And you'd have to kind of back into the figure of okay, well, if I want to compensate a junior salesperson on target earnings, maybe $70,000, $80,000 a year, half of that would come in through salary. The other half would be, sort of a ramp up of a quota that they would have an expectation of closing X amount of business over X amount of time that would compensate them the rest of the way.
It's awesome. No, it's exciting. It's the path not traveled. You do things different ways, and I don't think I'm going to magically turn into a sales machine. Were there any types of people that you love for that role? Were you hiring recent college grads? Were you hiring people that sold cars? Was there any sort of telltale of what might make a decent Scorpion salesperson?
So interestingly, one of the things we learned is that someone with a background in, let's say, home services, maybe owned a home service business, became a Scorpion seller in home services. They were much more productive than someone who's just, a junior guy who didn't know, anything about.
Hence your question before about like coming out of the space.
Yeah, exactly. So having specific experience in the space, whether it be a seller at another agency with a Rolodex of clients, or someone just familiar with the space. But ultimately, I think it depends on where the life cycle of the agency is. The reason why I say that is that most agencies don't have a sales development sort of resource or a very sophisticated sales coach or trainer there to help bring up junior people. In that case, it maybe makes more sense to just find someone who's been selling into that vertical for a while, and basically bring them over. When it comes to scaling up a sales team, you need to hire junior people, and that requires having a really strong onboarding and training and coaching and sort of development process in place for that to really work.
No, I mean, to your credit, I feel it's very similar to what you see in some of the insurance syndicates. If you look at the first guy at Undercover, billionaire. When you look at the people that have scaled insurance companies, I feel like you took that playbook and turned it to internet marketing.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Yeah. Curious about your experience with sales with regard to, anything you're comfortable with sharing with regard to you mentioned you have an 8-person team. Is it mostly inbounds? They're just qualifying.
Correct. We have an outbound, asset that does that. I've tried and lost money on third-party agencies. They've never found that to work. I've also learned something, which is even different between Scorpion and BluShark. So we are SEO first, and SEO and local first with paid second. Arguably, Scorpion was paid first.
From a product perspective.
Right?
Yeah.
And not making a value judgment either way, I would argue, from what I've learned, that the paid sale is a sale that more people can grasp more easily. Yeah. And that when I took people, and I think maybe, I don't know if I've ever dealt with anybody post Scorpion. I've definitely dealt with people post FindLaw, that the people that we saw, that the idea of selling a directory or selling paid search was significantly easier. Not saying that it's easy, but easier than the SEO sale. And that's one of the things that we have seen, that it is one thing to call somebody up and say, hey, give me $2,000 a month and I'm going to get you X number of phone calls. And you can sort of know what you're dealing with in a given market, to, hey, give me X amount of money and I'm not going to show you anything for 9 months. Yeah. That is a much harder sale.
That's a tough sale. Yeah. Right. Especially for a small law firm.
Correct. And we figured stuff out. We have now entry products. We now add PPC into these things. There's all sorts of places.
All that stuff,
but if you leave non-PPC, it's a more intellectualized sale.
It is.
Which is why I'm not a $1 billion organization. At the same time, we have sticky clients that love what we do, because when it works, and you even somebody who's a paid first person, as great as paid may be, there's Google, you may be the best paid person on the planet. There's only a limited ROI that Google will let you get.
Yeah, absolutely. And the market can go against you. Like, we have no control over cost per clicks
right. And so that has, to us, made it much harder. So again, let's go back to your audience for a minute, away from our personal love fest here, which would be, when you're doing this, knowing what your widget is, because the more sophisticated the widget, the harder the sale process is compared to. So for me, I believe it took an extra touch point or two for us to sell, because we were selling something that took a leap of faith, versus, hey, we're going to build a site and within 30 days you're going to have phone calls with your budget. And as you know, there's a distinction between paid and organic, in the sense that, yes, the best answer is both. I'm not somebody who's like, paid sucks, organic's great. I'm like, I love both. But when you're dealing with a client with limited resources, where do you start? And if you can get through that pain, I know that there's ROI that can be achieved on the other end. That's great, but that's a very hard concept to get through on the phone. When I listen to some of the people, if you listen to any of the legendary stuff from our friend from Wolf of Wall Street, he's not doing. He's like, I'm going to make you money right now. It's a dream.
Right.
It's there.
It's a compelling sell. I think the challenge that we faced and other agencies face when they are focused on an SEO based contract or SEO based product, at least as the cornerstone product, that negotiating contract length becomes challenging because the client doesn't want to agree to 12 months or 24 months because there's a lot of risk in that. But the agency needs enough runway to be able to provide results and show efficacy.
It's funny you say it. So we never went with, on our higher dollar SEO contracts, we've never done a contract length. We ask for a 60-day out, but that's about it. And one of the things that's been a good selling point, so that helps our salespeople, right? Because we're not saying you have to stay with us for a length of time, but we also, part of the reason I sort of look at it like if somebody leaves after, we never have people leave after 3 or 4 months. I say never, like once in the history of the company, but that is much less of a fear in the sense that you get your money for those 3 months. You're just selling a website. God bless, go off and do what you want. And as you know, an unhappy lawyer locked into a contract isn't really a fun place to be anyway.
Absolutely not. And and
she's like, on that, I'm going to wrap this up.
Yeah, well, I was going to say,
It brings you back some PTSD from the days of lawyers, right?
Exactly. So kind of as we wrap up here, I wanted to ask just two more sort of final questions. As having been down this road now for a while, specifically on the agency side, what advice would you have to maybe an agency owner that's taken more of a generalized approach to their market? They want to take a verticalized approach. They've been listening to our conversation. Any sort of parting advice you would have for them as they consider this vertical approach? I mean,
look, there's no one size fits all. I think long term, most people will end up with, especially if you're with exceptions, most people will end up with some sort of a niche. It may be defined differently. It may be, I have friends in DC that do, mid to larger size organization web rebuilds, and they're $50,000 to $80,000, and they churn them. And even though it's not industry specific, it's widgetized. The quicker you widgetize what you're doing, the more money you'll make. If you're doing PPC for one person, social for the next, and SEO for the third, like it gets you through the day, it gets you some revenue. I think the only benefit to that is you can see what you like to do, what's resonating. But I think in order to get margins, because at some point you're going to go from I have a business to what are my margins, what am I taking home? And I think that the sooner that you get to some sort of systemizable process, the better you will be. That doesn't mean you can't have more than one over time, but it means that the sooner that it's not just like for lawyers, there are people like anybody who knocks on the door is my client. Those guys generally don't make the same money as somebody who says, this is my vertical, I'm known for it. You go to Starbucks because there's coffee. They may sell books and some other stuff there, but you're there for a thing. And that the sooner that people associate you with that, the better.
That's awesome, Seth. One last question. I wholeheartedly agree with that, by the way. What's your motivation?
What is my motivation? I enjoy what I'm doing. I love building stuff. And I've been very blessed that, there's one of those things that like child rearing, bigger kids, bigger problems. I thought when I had like little toddlers, it was the worst ever. And now I have kids who are screwing up in school and doing all sorts of terrible stuff. I'm getting bad phone calls. And so, but what I would say is that with scale, I've been able to, I didn't understand at the time, but I've been able to be more of the emit, to be more of the entrepreneur who works on the business, not in the business. And so I feel like that is what drives me, is to get to the point where I'm able to tinker with and build things rather than be part of the production of it myself.
Yeah. That's awesome. If folks want to reach out to you and get connected with you, what's a good way for them to do that?
I'm a pretty easy guy to find. I'm Seth Seth J. Price on socials, Seth at BluShark Digital, no E, Seth at BluSharkDigital.com. But I'm pretty accessible. You pick up the phone and say, hey, you want to do this? I'm in. So if there is anybody in your audience, I say this because nobody will actually call me. But if any, I would tell my cell phone, right? It's 347-661-9999. And if anybody's listening actually has a question, call or text me. I challenge you. And it is unbelievable how many people are out there that if you did that to, who are upstream from where you are, that would help you out, and how few people actually do it.
That's true. That's true. Well, thank you for your generosity and your time today, Seth. It's been
Absolutely.
a great conversation. I appreciate that.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, folks, that's it for today. I'm Corey Quinn, and I hope you join me again next time for the Vertical Go-to-Market Podcast. If you receive value from this show, I would love a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.